Never play chess with an old rancher. Here's a masterclass on why patience is much deadlier than anger. You ever see a 78-year-old man hook a luxury SUV to a John Deere tractor and drag it straight into a muddy creek while the sheriff just stood there, filming the whole thing? Yeah, that really happened. And it all started with one woman, one white SUV, and one morning that was supposed to be peaceful. It was a Thursday morning in late spring, bright sky, cool air, the kind of morning where you can smell the dew and diesel mixing together. Grandpa Hal had been up since dawn feeding the cows and checking fences. Me, I was waiting on the hay truck. We'd ordered 3 bales worth for the week, and the driver was due any minute rattling up the old county road that cut through our 200 acres. Only problem was, when I stepped out to open the gate, I froze. There it was, a white SUV, shiny spotless, parked dead center across our entrance. Not off to the side, not angled politely right across the gate like it owned the dirt beneath it. I just stood there, one hand still holding my coffee, watching the sunlight bounce off that chrome bumper. You ever have one of those moments where something so ridiculous happens, your brain just refuses to accept it? That was me. Behind me, I heard Grandpa's boots on gravel. He came out of the barn, wiping his hands on an old rag, squinting against the sun. "What in the blue hell is that?" he muttered. I told him I didn't know. Maybe someone lost, maybe a surveyor or a realtor checking parcels again. He grunted the way he always did when he knew I was wrong. "Lost folks don't block a man's gate that perfect," he said. "And that ain't a work truck. That's a city woman's car." He took another sip of coffee, glancing at the watch strapped to his weathered wrist. "That hay truck's coming in 2 hours, Jake. If it can't get through, those cows are going to raise more hell than this fool can imagine." That line landed heavy because he was right. Timing mattered. If the truck had to turn around, we'd lose a delivery slot and half a day's feed. And around here, half a day meant hungry cattle and money lost. So I walked toward the SUV, slow hands, visible, polite, the way Grandpa taught me to handle trouble. The window rolled down smooth and tinted dark, and out came the face that would haunt the next 3 weeks of my life. She looked mid-50s hair, pulled tight sunglasses perched like armor, the kind of person who smelled like lavender and control. When she spoke, her voice had that brittle sweetness people use right before saying something ugly. "Morning," she said. "You're blocking a public access road." I blinked. "Ma'am, this here's private property. Been in my family 100 years. She smiled slow and cold. "Not according to Pine Creek redevelopment. This area's under community review now. You might want to check your boundaries." Boundaries. That word hit harder than it should have. I looked down at the dust on my boots, then up at her spotless tires, and right then I felt it, the quiet shift between peace and provocation. Before I could reply, Grandpa's old Ford rumbled closer. He stopped beside me, leaning out the window. "Everything all right, Jake?" I nodded toward the SUV. "This lady says our driveway's public property." He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of grin you see on a man who's about to start taking mental notes for a fight. "Is that right?" he said, tipping his hat toward her. "Well, ma'am, you're parked on Thompson land, and we don't do well with squatters." She huffed, rolled up her window, and drove off. The dust trailed behind her, but something about the way she looked back in the mirror told me she'd be coming again. Grandpa finished his coffee, crushed the paper cup, and said quietly, "Jake, that wasn't a mistake. That was a test." He walked back toward the barn, muttering to himself, "You mark my words, boy. This ain't the last we've seen of that woman, and when she comes back, she's bringing paperwork." I looked down the dirt road, where her SUV had vanished, the tire tracks still fresh, cutting across the red dust, like scars on old skin. The hay truck's horn echoed in the distance, but all I could think was one thing. She blocked the wrong damn gate. The next morning, I thought maybe it had all blown over. Maybe that lady had realized her mistake, apologized somewhere in her head, and moved on with her life. But around 10:30, I heard it again. The low, smug hum of a high-end SUV engine rolling over our gravel road, like it owned the sound of it. Sure enough, there she was. Same white SUV, same perfect spot, right across our gate. She got out this time, black heels sinking into soft dirt, clipboard in hand, like it was a badge. And the way she looked around, like the air itself should thank her for being there, made my teeth itch. "Morning," I said, keeping my voice calm. "You lost again." She smiled without humor. "Not lost, just documenting encroachments." I blinked. "Encroachments?" "Yes. According to Pine Creek redevelopment, the ranch fence line extends 3 feet into the Poe's public access corridor. That's a violation of easement standards. I stared at her for a long moment, trying to decide if she actually believed that nonsense or just liked hearing herself say the word easement. "You mind stepping back, ma'am? You're parked on our access road." She ignored me, completely raising her phone to take photos of our gate, our mailbox, even Grandpa's old Ford parked by the barn. "These structures will likely need to removed," she said. I couldn't help but laugh, but it came out dry like a cough. "Ma'am, that mailbox has been there longer than you've been alive." She turned her head just enough for me to catch the smirk. "Then it's probably due for replacement." Before I could answer, Grandpa's voice came from behind me, steady low and carved out of gravel. "Jake," he said, "you best let me handle this." He walked up slow, no rush, no anger, just that calm weight he carried from years of dealing with storms and men alike. "Morning, ma'am," he said, tipping his hat. "I'm Harold Thompson, owner of this land." She looked him up and down like she was inspecting livestock. "You'll want to take this up with my office, Mr. Thompson. I'm Karen Blackwell, Regional Director for Pine Creek Redevelopment. I oversee compliance infrastructure and zoning integrity." Grandpa nodded once. "Big words for a little road," she bristled. "We're building a community here. The county approved our preliminary surveys. That means shared access." Grandpa's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Ma'am, I was born on this ranch in 1947. My father built that fence. His father dug that creek with a mule and shovel. We've never shared it with anyone who didn't earn the right." Karen flipped a page on her clipboard, pretending to read something that probably didn't exist. "Progress doesn't stop for nostalgia, Mr. Thompson." He leaned closer, voice quiet. "Neither does common sense, ma'am. And you might want to remember nostalgia's what keeps a man from paving over history." For the first time, she lost that polished smile. Her jaw tightened. She tucked her clipboard under her arm, spun on her heel, and got back in her SUV. The tires spat gravel as she pulled away. But before turning onto the county road, she stopped, rolled her window down, and said one last thing. "You'll be hearing from my office, Mr. Thompson." Grandpa watched her taillights fade through the dust. He didn't move for a while, just watched. Then he sighed heavy and tired, like he'd seen this kind of battle too many times before. "Jake," he said, "go check the creek banks. Make sure she didn't bring surveyors in already." I frowned. "You think she'd go that far?" He looked at me, eyes clear cold. At Sun, people like that don't stop at words. They start with words. He turned toward the barn, muttering something about fences and fools. I watched the dust settle where her SUV had been, and a strange chill ran through me. It wasn't the wind. It was the feeling that she'd just declared war without even realizing Grandpa had already won the first move. The next few days should have been quiet. Cows fed, fences fixed, hay stacked. That's what spring's supposed to sound like out here. Wind, cattle, crickets, and peace. But peace doesn't last long when people like Karen get a taste of control. She started showing up every few mornings, never at the same time, never long enough for the sheriff to catch her. Just long enough to block the gate step outs, take pictures, and make me late for everything that mattered. The first week I tried to stay calm. Every time I saw that white SUV sitting across the entrance, I took a deep breath, grabbed my phone, and started filming like Emily told me to. "Evidence," she said, "always gather evidence." So I did. I logged the times, the dates, the photos. At first it almost felt professional, like I was the one in control. But by the second week it wasn't professional anymore. It was personal. She wasn't just parking there, she was parking like she enjoyed it. Diagonal blocking both lanes. Sometimes she'd idle with the windows down, talking loudly on her phone about progress using our driveway, like it was her boardroom. One morning, Grandpa came out holding his coffee, watching from the porch as I stood by the gate. "Still here?" he asked. "Yep," I said. "Same spot, same woman." He nodded, eyes squinting against the sun. "Same kind of fool I've been dealing with since '78. They changed the clothes, not the arrogance." I laughed, but it came out flat. We watched her for a while. When she finally pulled away, Grandpa just said, "Don't rise to it. Let her build her own case file of stupidity." I thought he was joking, but looking back, he was already planning something. By the start of week 3, Karen's routine turned cruel. That Monday, we got the first rain in weeks. I just finished clearing out a new drainage ditch we dug to keep Sweet Creek from flooding into the lower pasture. It took me 2 days shovel and all, and when I looked at it that morning, clean flowing, it felt like progress. Then around noon, I heard the familiar engine, the white SUV back again. I stayed calm, watched from the porch, filming as always. But instead of parking at the gate, she pulled forward right through the soft ditch line. Her tires dug deep, spinning once, twice, then clawing a deep rut straight through the fresh trench. Water splashed, mud flew, and by the time she reversed, half the bank was gone. I could almost feel Grandpa's pulse rising from 50 feet away. He didn't shout, didn't storm out, just stood there in the rain, coffee steaming in his hand, watching that woman drive away like she'd won a prize. When she was gone, he walked to the ditch, knelt down, and dipped his hand into the muddy water. It was swirling brown, clogged, ruined. He stared at it for a long time. "You know what this is, Jake," he said finally. "Water," I muttered, still angry. He shook his head. "It's evidence, and she just wrote her name in it." That night, Emily drove out from town. The kitchen smelled like wet earth and strong coffee. She spread her laptop on the table, papers everywhere, and started typing up a trespass and property damage notice. "She's crossed the line now," Emily said. "Video-proof, timestamp physical damage. This is the kind of thing even a lazy county clerk can't ignore." Grandpa sat at the table silent, rubbing the bridge of his nose with a thumb and forefinger. Finally, he looked up at her. "You're good at law, Emily. But you ever notice that people like her don't fear paper? They fear embarrassment." Emily paused. "Meaning what?" He didn't answer, just leaned back in his chair, staring out the window toward the dark silhouette of the gate. "She's not done yet, and when she comes back, we'll let her show the whole county who she really is." Over the next few days, it rained harder. The ditch overflowed, pasture flooded, and every time I passed that washed-out section, I felt my jaw tighten. I knew Grandpa was right. We'd win on paper eventually, but I wanted her to stop now. I'd see the SUV in town, sometimes shiny and smug under streetlights, and my hands would curl into fists. But then I'd hear Grandpa's voice in my head. "Patience, boy. The law takes time, but the land has patience too." He was right. Out here, you don't rush a storm. You wait for it to break, and when it does, you make damn sure you're the one holding the high ground. That was the week Sweet Creek stopped running clear, and the week Grandpa started sharpening his kind of justice. When you've lived on the same land for 100 years, you start to think you've seen every kind of storm, wind, drought, flood, even the kind that comes with lawyers' names on it. But I learned that spring, the worst storms don't howl, they whisper through paperwork. 2 days after Karen tore up our drainage ditch, a certified envelope showed up in our mailbox. Return address, Pine Creek Redevelopment Legal Affairs Division. Emily slid it open carefully, eyes scanning fast, but jaw tightening slow. "They're threatening to sue," she said, "claiming your fence violates a county setback, and they're asserting easement rights through Sweet Creek." Grandpa didn't flinch. He just leaned back in his chair, the old wood creaking under his weight. "Sweet Creek," he said softly. "That creek's been ours since before that woman learned to spell redevelopment." Emily spread the papers out across the kitchen table, the one that had seen everything from Sunday dinners to cattle birth ledgers. She pointed to a map attached to the back. It was glossy printed in color, all clean lines and false authority. The red border of Pine Creek Estates bled right over half our southern pasture. According to their version, Sweet Creek was now a public waterway. I felt my stomach drop. "Can they do that?" I asked. Emily sighed. "They can claim anything. Proving it, that's another story." Grandpa stayed quiet for a while. Then he stood slow and deliberate and said something that made the air shift. "Come with me." We followed him through the rain, out to the old workshop behind the barn. It smelled like oil, pine dust, and thyme. In the far corner beneath a faded tarp, he reached down and dragged out a small wooden chest, old, scarred, but still solid. He brushed away dust with the edge of his sleeve. The brass latch clicked, and inside lay a neatly folded stack of papers, yellowed brittle, tied with a strip of leather. "My father kept these," he said. Then I added my own. Every survey, every deed, every boundary record since 1923. He unrolled a large map across the workbench. The parchment crackled like old leaves. I leaned over it, and there in faded blue ink was a winding line labeled Sweet Creek. "Look here," he said, tracing it with one finger. "Property boundary, Thompson Ranch. Not the water line, the creek bed itself. This document says we own 20 feet beyond both banks. Mineral water and access rights recorded and notarized. Emily bent closer eyes, flicking between the date and the signature. This is from the County Survey Office, 1950. Original hydrographic record. Grandpa, this is gold. He smiled faintly. No, honey. This is truth. Gold's only worth what folks agree on. Truth stands whether they agree or not. She scanned the paper again, then glanced at the glossy redevelopment map from the envelope. They used a new overlay. Someone redrew the boundaries. They made the creek look like a public drainage channel. Grandpa nodded slowly. Fraud in ink, just like the old days. They changed the map first, then pretend the land followed. He turned to me. Jake, get my old camera from the cabinet. I fetched the battered Nikon he used for calving season. He laid the map, flat set-up lights, and had me take photos of every inch. Seals, signatures, stamps, coordinates. Emily filed the originals back into the box, tucked the copies in a fresh folder, and wrote a single label, Thompson Ranch Sweet Creek Ownership Primary Evidence. Grandpa smiled when he read it. Now that's a title worth keeping. He poured us each a bit of black coffee from his thermos. You'll handle the paper war, Emily, but I'll handle the land. One fights with ink, the other with patience. That night the rain turned heavy. I couldn't sleep. Every time thunder rolled, I thought of that shiny white SUV parked somewhere dry. Its driver smug and sure she had us cornered, but in the workshop under a single hanging bulb, Grandpa sat with that old box open beside him, tracing the creek line with his calloused finger, as if reacquainting himself with an old friend. When I stepped in, he didn't look up. He just said quietly, "They think they can redraw history, but history's got roots deeper than their ink. This land remembers who tended it and who tried to steal it." He looked at me, then eyes calm but sharp. "Tomorrow we give them notice official legal and loud enough for the whole county to hear. Let's see how brave they feel when the law's written in mud, not marble." I nodded even though my stomach was tight because I knew him. That tone meant something was already turning in his head. And just before I turned off the light, he added one more thing, soft but certain. "Jake, keep that camera charged. Paper's fine, but the truth likes being filmed." That was the night the paper war began, and the night Grandpa opened the box that would change everything. By the next morning, the rain had eased into a lazy drizzle, the kind of weather that smells like wet hay and rust. But something in the air had changed. Not the sky, not the soil, something in Grandpa. He was quiet over breakfast, turning the same coffee cup in his hand, like he was polishing a thought. Emily was on the phone with the county clerk confirming that our ownership documents were now officially scanned into the public record. Every word, every signature protected. When she hung up, she smiled tiredly. "It's filed. They can't erase it now." Grandpa nodded, but his eyes stayed distant. "Good." Then we moved to Phase 2. I looked up from my plate. Phase 2. He smirked just a little. "Operation Mud Lesson?" Emily sighed, half laughing. "Please tell me that's a metaphor." "Nope," he said, dead serious. "It's a teaching method." After lunch, he told me to meet him in the barn. When I got there, he was already hauling out chains, an old post driver, a paint can, and a hand-painted wooden sign that said in big black letters, "Private Property." Abandoned vehicles will be removed after 72 hours. Texas Property Code 683. He handed me the post driver and pointed toward the main gate. "We're not moving a finger without following the law, Jake. They love to think we're the crazy ones, so we give them paperwork, procedure, and patience. Everything nice and legal with witnesses." We dug the post 2 feet into the ground. Rainwater mixed with the clay, making the dirt stick to our boots like glue. By the time we finished, my back was sore, and my jeans weighed 10 extra pounds. Grandpa stepped back, admiring the sign, like an artist. "There," he said, "now they've been warned." Later that afternoon, Sheriff Johnson stopped by in his patrol truck. He'd heard from Emily and wanted to see the setup himself. Big man, deep voice always carried calm, like it was armor. "You're doing it right, Hal," he said, scanning the sign. "If she parks there again, you log the hours. After 72, she's fair game under the code. I'll even come out to witness it if needed." Grandpa nodded. "Might take you up on that, Bob. Something tells me we'll have company soon." Sheriff chuckled, tipping his hat. "You always did know when a storm's coming. Just don't let it turn into one you can't control." "Bob," Grandpa said quietly, Control's just another word for timing. They both laughed, but there was something in Grandpa's eyes, that sharpness I'd seen before. The same look he had when he was fixing a problem that wasn't going to fix itself. That evening we went through the motions of a normal night. Dinner dishes, weather report on the radio. But every time thunder rolled in the distance, Grandpa would glance out the window like he was tracking something invisible. Before bed, I found him in the barn again, checking the chains, wiping down the tractor, even topping off the fuel. The air smelled like diesel and rain-soaked earth, a scent I'd grown up with but never felt uneasy about until that night. "You really think she'll be back?" I asked. He looked up from the toolbox, eyes glinting under the dim bulb. "Oh, she'll be back," he said. "Folks like her don't retreat, they escalate." He wiped his hands on a rag and set the wrench down. "But this time, we'll be ready. She wants to play HOA with property rights. Fine. We'll give her a hands-on lesson in mud and in patience." When I went to turn off the lights, I heard him mutter something, half to himself, half to the barn. "They think this land's just dirt, but dirt remembers. It remembers who planted, who paid, and who trespassed." He looked over at the tractor, its green paint streaked with the glow of lightning through the open doors. "Let's see how her fancy SUV likes meeting Texas clay." I didn't say a word, because when Grandpa Hal Thompson started talking like that, you didn't argue. You just made sure the camera batteries were charged. That was the night I realized Grandpa wasn't angry anymore. He was patient, and that made him dangerous. The next morning felt like the calm before something big. You could smell it, that heavy metallic scent before a storm, the kind that makes dogs restless and old men certain. At 9:14 a.m., she came back. Same white SUV, same smug stillness in her posture, like she was doing us a favor by trespassing. Grandpa was already sitting on the porch, coffee cup in one hand, notebook in the other. He didn't move, didn't say a word. He just flipped the page and wrote, "April 19th, 9:14. AM vehicle obstructing gate." I watched from beside him, the rain clouds building low on the horizon. "You think she'll stay long?" I asked. "Long enough?" he said without looking up. The clock just started. Karen got out, heels clicking on gravel like gunfire. She held her phone up, recording our property again. Every few seconds, she'd mumble something about documentation, as if saying it out loud made it legal. Then she turned toward us. "Mr. Thompson, we're still within community access rights. The county's reviewing your outdated easement." Grandpa didn't even blink. "Ma'am, you're on private land. You've been warned. The sign's right there, big enough to read even for city folks." "You can't intimidate me," she snapped. "We're the future of this county." He smiled faintly. "Funny thing about the future, it don't mean much when it's built on lies." Karen's face twitched, and for the first time she looked unsure, but only for a moment. Then she climbed back into her SUV and sat there, engine idling, windshield wipers, keeping rhythm with her ego. By noon, the first thunder rolled. Grandpa had logged the hours, 3 down, 69 to go. He had a system, every detail neatly written in his spiral notebook. Time of arrival, weather conditions, even the position of the vehicle relative to the gate post. He'd photograph it every 6 hours on the dot. Documentation, he said, ain't about revenge. It's about respect. Even fools deserve proof before they hang themselves. The second day, the rain came harder. Sweet Creek swelled to twice its width, mud rising like chocolate milk around the gate. Karen's SUV was still there now, coated with streaks of brown from the spinning tires. She tried to move it maybe once or twice, but the clay had its own kind of justice. Texas mud doesn't care about four-wheel drive. When I walked out to check the sign, she rolled down her window just enough to speak. "You're harassing me," she said, voice sharp. "This is illegal obstruction." I pointed at the sign, water dripping from my hat brim. "No, ma'am, this is Texas law. You left your vehicle here. In about 36 hours, it'll be legally ours to remove." She blinked, processing that, like it was a foreign language. "You wouldn't dare." Behind me, Grandpa's voice came like thunder, without lightning. "Ma'am, I don't dare. I document." She revved her engine, mud splattering across her white fenders, but the truck didn't move an inch. Then she slammed it into park and rolled the window up. I swear I saw her phone light up through the glass. She was calling someone, probably her lawyer, or maybe her mother-in-law. Didn't matter. The clock didn't stop for phone calls. By the third day, the rain had turned Sweet Creek into a small brown river. The SUV sat crooked one wheel, half sunk into mud, like it was already trying to bury itself from shame. Grandpa made his last entry April 22nd, 9:15 a.m., 72 hours complete. He capped his pen, stood up, and stretched his back with a slow grunt. "All right, Jake," he said. "Time's up." I felt something in my chest tighten. This wasn't anger anymore. It was inevitability, like gravity deciding to do its job. "You calling the sheriff?" I asked. "Already did," he said. "Told Bob to bring his camera too. Man should witness what happens when arrogance meets property code." He looked at the gate one last time, rain dripping off his hat brim, then muttered almost to himself, "You give people rope, Jake, and sooner or later, they'll tie their own knot." That was the 72nd hour. And by the look in Grandpa's eyes, the lesson was about to begin. By the time the sheriff's truck pulled up, Sweet Creek had turned into a brown, roaring snake. The rain wasn't falling anymore. It was slanting, pushed sideways by wind that carried dust and judgment. Grandpa was already standing by the gate, oilskin coat, buttoned to his neck, clipboard in one hand, camera in the other. He looked like a man clocking in for work, and in a way he was. Sheriff Johnson stepped out of his patrol truck hat, low against the rain clipboard under a plastic sleeve. "Well, Hal," he said over the wind, "looks like your 72 hours just ran out." Grandpa nodded, handing him the notebook. Every minute logged, every photo time-stamped. "You want to witness the removal officially. That's why I'm here." Karen's SUV sat there half buried in wet clay, tilted just enough to look pitiful. Her headlights flickered once, and then she stepped out, heels sinking, umbrella snapping backward in the wind. "What is this?" she shouted. "You can't touch my car. This is harassment." The sheriff held up his hand. "Ma'am, it's been 72 hours. Vehicles classified as abandoned on private property under state code. You were notified by posted signage. Mr. Thompson's within his rights to remove it. I'm not abandoning anything. I was assessing access conditions for community planning." Grandpa's voice cut through the rain, steady, almost gentle. "You assessed enough, ma'am? Time for you to move your vehicle, or I'll move it for you." Karen's face twisted. She pointed at him, shaking. "You so much as scratch that car, I'll have you arrested." Sheriff Johnson sighed. "Ma'am, he just asked you to move it yourself. You got the keys." She hesitated. "Too long?" Lightning flashed, and in that split second of white light, I saw her face. Panic trying to hide behind arrogance. "Fine," she said finally. "It's stuck anyway. You'll have to pay for the tow." Grandpa tilted his head. "Oh, don't you worry. I brought my own tow." He turned to me. "Jake, start the tractor." The green John Deere came to life, with a deep, throaty growl, its headlights cutting through sheets of rain like two angry eyes. Grandpa walked behind it, chain in hand, steady as ever. No rush, no drama. Just work to be done. Sheriff Johnson watched quietly. Arms crossed the rain, streaming down his jacket. Karen screamed over the storm. "You can't—" "You'll damage it, ma'am," the sheriff said dryly. "That's what happens when you park illegally in Texas clay." Grandpa crouched low, hooked the heavy chain under the SUV's rear axle, then stood up, rain pouring off the brim of his hat. He gave the chain one firm tug, then one nod to me. "Easy now," he said. "Slow pull, don't hurt the dirt." I eased the throttle forward. The tractor rumbled, tires biting deep. The chain went taut, then sang that high metallic note that means commitment. The SUV lurched, groaned, and then with a sucking sound like a swamp exhaling, it started to move. Karen screamed, "Stop! That's private property!" Grandpa didn't even look at her. "You're right, ma'am. It's mine. You're standing on it." The tractor dragged the SUV backward, tires slipping, mud flying in arcs across the rain. Sweet Creek churned behind the gate, its water rising inch by inch, waiting. Sheriff Johnson called over the storm. "Hal, you sure about the creek?" "Completely sure," Grandpa said. "Got the hydrographic record to prove it." Karen ran toward the sheriff. "He's insane. Do something." Sheriff Johnson adjusted his hat. "He's following state property code, ma'am. You want to file a complaint? I suggest you bring a better map." The SUV slid another few feet metal, groaning under its own pride. Grandpa stopped, checked the tension, and gave me a small hand signal. Forward again. The tires broke free with a wet snap, and then the whole vehicle started rolling slow but steady toward the edge of Sweet Creek. Karen's voice cracked through the thunder. "You'll pay for this." Grandpa's voice came back calm, like a man giving advice to someone already too far gone. "Ma'am, you already paid for it," in arrogance and unpaid respect. When the SUV reached the edge, Grandpa signaled stop. He turned to the sheriff, his face calm, his coat soaked through. "Bob, you got all you need for the report. Every photo, every word Johnson said." Grandpa nodded. "Good. Then we'll finish this properly tomorrow, once the rain stops and the paperwork dries." Karen blinked confused. "You're leaving it here for now," Grandpa said. "Let nature think about it overnight." That night the rain didn't stop. By sunrise, Sweet Creek would rise higher than anyone remembered. And that white SUV, well, it was about to learn why you don't pick a fight with Texas mud, or a man who's been studying it for 78 years. By dawn, the ranch looked like the world had turned to water. Sweet Creek wasn't a creek anymore. It was a full-blown river, swollen and angry, curling around the edge of our land like it wanted to make a point. The white SUV still sat there, half in mud, half defiant. Its taillights blinked faintly through the mist, like some wounded animal that didn't know it was beaten yet. Grandpa stood by the porch, coffee-steaming eyes fixed on that truck through the rain. He hadn't said much since the sheriff left the night before, just wrote one line in his notebook before bed. "Let gravity finish what arrogance began." Around 8 o'clock, we heard the sound of another engine. Sheriff Johnson back again with his deputy and a county tow truck trailing behind. The rain hadn't let up, but the sight of that sheriff's star cutting through the fog felt like an anchor in a rising sea. "Morning, Howell," the sheriff called, stepping out. "Guess nature got ahead of us." Grandpa tipped his hat. "She's always been punctual." The deputy pointed toward the SUV. "She's sinking." And he was right. The rear tires were already halfway submerged mud, bubbling around them like boiling soup. Every few seconds, the SUV would rock forward an inch, as if Sweet Creek itself was tugging at its bumper. Not long after Karen's car arrived, a black sedan this time, smaller, sleeker. But the same woman stepped out umbrella, snapping in the wind like a flag of surrender. She shouted through the rain, "You people are insane! You're letting my car drown!" Sheriff Johnson raised an eyebrow. "It's been 72 hours, ma'am. The property owner logged and reported it. We're just witnessing the removal." "You call that removal?" she screamed. "That's destruction." Grandpa finally spoke, his voice calm and steady, the same voice that used to calm skittish horses. "No, ma'am. Destruction is what you did to my drainage. This here's correction." She looked at him, hair plastered to her face, her expensive blouse soaked through. "You'll pay for this, old man." Grandpa's eyes narrowed just a touch. "I already did." Impatience. The tow truck driver hesitated, looking from the sheriff to Grandpa. "You want me to try to pull it?" The sheriff shook his head. "Not in this current. It's too deep, too slick. Let's wait for it to settle." But Grandpa just stepped forward, motioning for me to follow him. He carried the heavy chain again, the same one from yesterday, and I realized what he meant to do before he even said it. "Jake," he said quietly, "bring the tractor around. Low gear, don't rush it." "Grandpa, it's just gravity's helper son, that's all." The rain stung my face as I climbed into the tractor. The engine roared to life, its lights cutting golden through the fog. Grandpa waded knee-deep into the mud, the chain glinting in his hands like a length of old memory. He crouched, secured it to the SUV's axle, then turned and gave me that familiar two-finger signal, steady pull. The chain went tight. The SUV groaned, tires spinning helplessly, mud splattering against the sheriff's boots. Karen screamed again. "Stop! You're going to destroy it!" Grandpa shouted back without looking up. "Ma'am, it's already destroyed, just didn't have the decency to admit it." The SUV jerked, lurched forward another few feet, and then a deep, wet sound cut through the storm. Schlurp. The ground gave way beneath it. In one slow, graceful motion, the back end dipped, the front lifted, and then the whole vehicle slid nose first into Sweet Creek. The splash was enormous brown water exploding upward, rushing over the bank mud, and a reed swirling like coffee stirred too fast. For a heartbeat, it stayed visible, white hood shimmering under the current. Then the water swallowed it whole. Silence followed, except for the steady hiss of rain and the faraway crackle of thunder. Even Karen stopped shouting. She just stared, mouth open, eyes wide, watching her symbol of control sink into the land she'd tried to own. Sheriff Johnson broke the silence first. "Well," he said softly, "that's one way to enforce property code." Grandpa wiped rain from his face with a handkerchief. "Nature's Enforcement Division works faster than paperwork, Bob." Karen's voice was hoarse now. "You'll regret this, all of you." The sheriff looked at her expression flat as Texas limestone. "Ma'am, you're free to file your complaint assuming you can swim it out." Grandpa turned to me, then eyes softer now, the storm easing in his face. "Jake," he said quietly, "remember this day. Not 'cause we won, but 'cause we stayed right when wrong was easier." He glanced at the swirling creek. "Mud don't lie, son. It always tells who stood where." By nightfall, the storm passed. The SUV was gone. The creek ran brown for a day, then cleared itself by morning like the land had washed away the arrogance and left only truth. Grandpa never gloated. He just poured himself a cup of coffee, looked out toward Sweet Creek and said, what became one of his many quiet sermons, "The earth always keeps its receipts." By morning, the rain was gone. Sweet Creek ran calm again, brown giving way to clear, as if the storm had taken all the noise with it. Grandpa stood at the porch rail, coffee in one hand, his old camera in the other. He'd been up since dawn, quietly replaying the video footage frame by frame, the one showing the white SUV slipping into the water. "That's enough proof for anyone who can read a law book," he said softly. I nodded, watching the creek glisten in the sunlight. It looked peaceful now, like it hadn't just devoured a 2-ton symbol of arrogance. By noon, Sheriff Johnson came back, not in his usual calm gait, but with a folder tucked tight under his arm. He looked both satisfied and cautious, the kind of face lawmen get when justice meets paperwork. "Morning, Hal. Jake," he said. "Got something you'll want to see." He laid the folder on the table. Inside were color prints, time stamps, and the sheriff's own written statement. "Filed and witnessed," he said. "You're clear, Hal. Full compliance with Texas property code. No charges, no civil liability. Matter of fact," he grinned slightly, "county attorney says it's one of the cleanest lawful removals he's ever seen." Grandpa chuckled low. "Well, I always did like things tidy." But Sheriff wasn't done. He handed over another sheet stamped and sealed. "Now this one's for her, Karen Blackwell, charged with trespassing, property damage, false claims, and filing fraudulent survey documents with the county office." The sheriff's tone was matter of fact, but I could hear the satisfaction underneath. Turns out her redevelopment maps were part of a private scheme with Pine Creek's investment wing. She was trying to extend a driveway control past its approved limits using doctored survey overlays. Emily, who'd driven in from town that morning, let out a sharp exhale. "We knew it," she said. "We just didn't have the proof." Sheriff nodded toward Grandpa. "You do now. Those old maps of yours, the originals, they're what cracked the whole thing open. County records confirmed your creek boundary from 1950. She never ever a claim, not even close." Grandpa didn't gloat. He just smiled faintly like a man watching seeds sprout exactly where he'd planted them. "Truth slow," he said, "but it don't die easy." That afternoon, word spread faster than the storm had. Neighbors from both sides of the county line came by. Some to shake hands, some just to see if it was true. The story had already made its way to the local paper. Pine Creek director faces legal probe after SUV incident. Reporters came by too, but Sheriff Johnson handled them firm but polite, keeping the circus out of the ranch. He told them the same thing every time. No comment. Private property, lawful action, open investigation. Then he'd add, "But you can quote me on this. Mud don't lie." Later that week, Emily came back from town with news that made Grandpa laugh out loud. A rare, full laugh that rattled the coffee mugs on the counter. "You won't believe this," she said. "Karen's been suspended from Pine Creek redevelopment. Corporate called it a serious breach of professional ethics. Her own board threw her under the bus." Grandpa nodded. "That's how empires crumble, Emily. From the top, down one cowardly memo at a time." Emily smiled. "There's more. The county wants copies of your maps for permanent record. They're revising the land boundaries officially." He reached for his hat, still smiling. "Took him 70 years to catch up with what my daddy already knew." 2 days later, Margaret Sullivan, the demolition lawyer Emily had called, drove up the muddy lane in a beige sedan. Professional, sharp, polite in the way a raptor is polite before it strikes. She shook Grandpa's hand like she was sealing a treaty. "Mr. Thompson." She said the HOA board has authorized a full settlement, compensation for property damage, legal costs, and emotional distress. You'll also receive an official apology from Pine Creek's board of directors. Grandpa raised an eyebrow. I don't need an apology, ma'am. Just make sure they stay on their side of the creek. She smiled thinly. They will. I think your little mud lesson went viral inside their corporate Slack. Emily burst out laughing. You're kidding. Not at all, Margaret said. Someone leaked the sheriff's footage. You're trending in 3 counties as the farmer who sunk the HOA. That night, the house was quiet again. The rain had stopped for good, and the frogs were back to their steady choir by Sweet Creek. Grandpa sat by the fire, cup of coffee in one hand, old notebook in the other. He wrote one last entry. Dispute settled. Creek runs clear. Then he closed the book, set it beside his chair, and said something that stuck with me forever. See, Jake, when folks forget where the lines are, life's job is to remind them. Sometimes it takes a lawyer. Sometimes it takes a storm. And sometimes it just takes one old man with a chain and a conscience. By summer, the grass grew tall again. The mud dried. The fence stood firm. And Sweet Creek sang its same old tune, one of patience and pride and proof. They called it the Sweet Creek Incident, but Grandpa just called it a Tuesday. By June, the pastures were green again. The storms had passed. The clay had dried. And the only trace of the flood was the way Sweet Creek gleamed wider under the sun, as if it had stretched itself proud after proving a point. Grandpa rebuilt the washed-out fence by hand, plank by plank, like a man performing an old ritual. He never hurried. He never muttered about what happened. He just worked, quiet, sure, unshaken, the way men do when their conscience is lighter than the sky. Sometimes I'd catch him pausing by the creek, watching the water slide over smooth stones. When I asked what he was thinking, he'd just say, "Nothing, Jake, just listening to proof." Emily moved her small office into town that summer, a little brick building on Main Street with a brass sign that read, Rodriguez and Thompson Property and Land Rights. Her first client was a retired farmer from 2 counties over a man fighting off another HOA's overreach. By the time she finished the case, the settlement paid for her first real assistant and a new roof for our barn. Every time she came home, she'd bring fresh coffee and a smile that said, the war might have ended, but the mission hadn't. Grandpa, she'd tell him, you'd be surprised how many folks out there are standing on land they don't realize they still own. He'd grin and answer, well, sweetheart, that's the good thing about land. It waits for you even when the world forgets. As for Pine Creek redevelopment, their shiny signs started coming down one by one. By autumn, the company had withdrawn its expansion plan entirely. The board issued a public apology in the county paper, though Grandpa never bothered to read it. Apologies don't fix dirt, he said. Work does. Still, the neighbors noticed. Folks who'd once kept quiet about the HOA's bullying started speaking up. Stories about forged fines, phantom citations, and phony community upgrades that only benefited the board. The sheriff's office opened a quiet investigation. By winter, Pine Creek's entire leadership had resigned. Nobody called it justice, but everyone called it right. One crisp morning, I found Grandpa sitting by Sweet Creek again. Same worn hat, same thermos. But this time, he had a folded newspaper in his lap. He wasn't reading it, just resting his hand on it. You see this? He asked, tapping the page. They wrote about us again. Called me a local hero. He chuckled, eyes still on the water. Hero my foot. All I did was follow the law and use a chain. But I guess these days that's enough to make headlines. I sat beside him, the smell of grass and creek mud filling the air. The kind of smell that never leaves your clothes or your blood. You ever regret it? I asked quietly. The fight, the storm, the way it all went down. He took a long sip from his thermos, then passed it to me. No, Jake, you can't regret standing your ground. You just gotta make sure you're standing for the right reason. He smiled, lines deep as riverbeds around his eyes. We didn't fight her for revenge. We fought her to remind the land who it belonged to. And that lesson don't need to be repeated often. That evening, Emily joined us for supper. She brought cornbread and a framed copy of the original 1950 hydrographic map. She hung it on the wall right above Grandpa's chair. The blue ink had faded, but the words still stood clear. Thompson Ranch, Sweet Creek, private boundary. Grandpa leaned back admiring it. Well, he said, Now the house remembers too. Later, as the sun dipped behind the oak line, we all sat in quiet. Just the crackle of the fire and the low murmur of the creek beyond the fields. And for the first time in months, I realized how still everything felt. Not empty, just settled. When I tucked the old wooden box back under the bench that night, I found something new inside. A small note written in Grandpa's careful hand. "If they come for the land again, don't raise your voice. Raise your proof." I smiled. It sounded like him. Half warning, half wisdom, all truth. The flood washed away a truck of lie and a little bit of arrogance, but it left behind what mattered most: roots law and memory. Grandpa Hal never fought for glory. He fought for peace. And peace, he always said, ain't the absence of trouble, it's the proof you handled it right. By late July, the sun was back to its usual Texas self, bright, loud, and proud. The county fairgrounds looked like they'd been polished by summer itself. Long tables under canvas tents, barbecue smoke curling through the air, and the steady hum of 100 small-town conversations. They called it the County Line Gathering, a thank you dinner for the folks who stood up for what was right. And truth be told, a bit of a celebration for the little creek that taught a big lesson. The sheriff's department had set up a booth beside the bandstand. Kids were getting photos with the patrol truck, and someone had even hung a wooden sign that said, "Mud don't lie." Grandpa got the loudest applause when he showed up. Not because he wanted it, but because everyone there knew what he'd done quietly, properly, without a single word out of place. He took off his hat and waved once. That was enough. Emily gave a short speech after the pastor's blessing. Her voice was steady, clear, full of the new kind of confidence that only comes when you've earned your victories the hard way. "This isn't about one man or one creek," she said. "It's about remembering that our land and our laws only mean something if we protect them with both hands." The crowd cheered, and someone from the back yelled, "You tell 'em, lawyer lady." She laughed, shaking her head, and Grandpa leaned over to me, whispering, "She'll be governor someday. You mark my words." When it was my turn to say a few words, I didn't plan a speech. I just looked out at the faces, neighbors, farmers, teachers, folks who'd kept to themselves during the chaos, but showed up when truth finally came out. "Most of you saw that video," I began, "but what you didn't see was the waiting, the long nights, the patience, the quiet planning. Grandpa taught me something through all that. He said, 'The law's like the land, Jake. You can't rush it. You can only work it, care for it, and trust it'll yield when it's ready.'" People nodded, not the fast kind of nods you give out of politeness, but the slow, heavy kind that comes from having lived a few hard lessons yourself. As the sun dropped low over Sweet Creek, the band started playing Amarillo by morning. Kids danced barefoot in the dust, mamas clapped time, and for a while nobody talked about lawsuits or property lines. We just lived free easy together. Sheriff Johnson found Grandpa sitting on a folding chair near the fence line, handing him a cold bottle of sweet tea. "You did good, Hal," he said. "Not just for yourself, for everybody." Grandpa smiled, eyes crinkling at the corners. "Didn't do it for everybody, Bob. Did it for the dirt. She's the one that carries all of us." The sheriff nodded, slow and thoughtful. "Yeah, and she sure knows how to keep her seats." They both laughed, the quiet, knowing kind of laugh that only comes after storms you've already survived. That night, the lanterns by Sweet Creek burned long after the music stopped. The water whispered steady under the bridge, same as it always had. And as I watched Grandpa talking with friends under that golden light, I realized peace doesn't just come after the fight. It's born from it. If you stand your ground with patience, proof, and just enough faith to let the land do the talking. It was late September when I noticed Grandpa slowing down, not in spirit, never that, but in the way his steps took just a second longer, the way he'd pause halfway to the barn to catch a breath and look at the horizon. He said it wasn't age catching up, just gravity reminding him who was boss. Most mornings we'd sit by Sweet Creek, same spot, where the white SUV had disappeared months ago. The water ran clear now. You could see minnows darting between stones, and the old willow dipping its roots where the bank had healed itself. He liked to say the creek forgave faster than people did. I believed him. One evening, as the sun melted down behind the oak ridge, he handed me his old spiral notebook, the one with every date, every note from the day Karen first parked at the gate to the day Justice washed her pride away. The cover was soft from years of use. The ink faded in places, but every line carried his hand, neat, patient, unshaken. "It's yours now," he said quietly. "Keep it close. It's not a journal. It's proof of who we are and what's worth standing for. I thumbed through the pages, reading the neat entries, times, weather, witness names. Then, at the very back, in handwriting, more careful than usual, he'd written a single line, "The land remembers the hands that honor it." I looked up at him. He was watching the creek, a soft half-smile under that weathered hat. "Grandpa," I asked, "you ever think about moving, maybe somewhere quieter?" He chuckled slow and dry. "Jake, if it's quieter than this, it's heaven, and I ain't in no rush to check in." We both laughed, and for a moment time didn't move. That winter when the frost came early, Grandpa spent more time by the fire than the fence line. But every morning, I'd still hear the same thing, the kettle whistling the back door, creaking his boots, and his boots scuffing across the porch to check on his creek. One morning, the sounds didn't come. I found him in his chair by the window, coffee half-finished, notebook resting on his lap. He was looking out towards Sweet Creek, and he looked content, like a man who'd seen his last sunrise exactly where he wanted to be. We buried him on the ridge facing the water. The county sent a flag, the sheriff spoke, and half the town came not out of duty, but out of respect. Emily read a few words from his notebook. Her voice trembled when she reached the last line he'd ever written. "Peace is earned, not given, and the proof of a life well lived is that the land still calls your name when you're gone." Every time I walk down to Sweet Creek now, I see that same patch of earth where the SUV sank and the grass has grown thicker there than anywhere else. Maybe that's how the land says thank you. Grandpa Hal never left the ranch, not really. He's in every fence post, every gate hinge, and in every quiet moment when the world forgets how to listen. And sometimes, when the wind moves just right, I swear I still hear him say, "Mud don't lie, Jake. It just tells the truth slower than people do." The most brilliant part of this story isn't the mud. It's how Grandpa Hal let Karen defeat herself. Instead of losing his temper, he just handed her enough rope to hang her own career, proving that the loudest person in the room is rarely the smartest. Have you ever dealt with an entitled person who totally dug their own grave? Tell me your story in the comments below.